Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Izaka Square Tables, hosted by Izaka and sponsored by Nuria. Today's Square Table is with the title Purple Timor Stories. Before we begin, I would like to start with some housekeeping rules. So if you don't mind, please mute your microphone and stop sharing your video as soon as you enter the session. For the CP, please make sure that the name on the Teams is the exact name you used in terms of first name and last name, so we know who you are and we are able to accredit you with the CPs. This presentation will be recorded and afterwards it will be shared most probably in a day or two. And please, if you have any questions, our speaker tonight asked for the questions to be at the very far end of the presentation. We will be, as moderators and host, I'm your host for tonight. My name is Ramzi Masri. We will be checking out your questions, taking note of them, and maybe sending it at the end of the presentation. I would like to present today's speaker, Pipin Vesser. He already has a lot of experience in leading Dutch organizations in the field of digital security, a forensic investigator, an ethical hacker, a security consultant, and teacher. And I would like to maybe move out to him to start his presentation. Pepin, back to you.
Thanks, Ramzi. I'll just get this thing started. Just give it a minute. And I do realize I'm the only thing standing in between you and your beer later on this evening. So let's keep it under the hour, and let's have some fun with purple teaming. Okay, just a check.
Yep, it's working fine.
Working fine. Great, thanks. Okay, so the title of today's presentation is Purple Team War Stories. And as already noted, I will give you a small obligatory intro of who I am. Then I'll talk to you about the key principles of purple teaming. We'll end with some actual experiences, some things we encountered during these assignments. And we have a small wrap-up and some Q&A time. So a little bit about me. Ramzi did already start 21 years in information security. This year started out at Fox IT. I did get some certifications. They were on my business card, but my business card was too small. But I gave up on acquiring the CPEs in 2008, so these are not valid anymore. I worked at Fox IT from 2000 to 2008. I traded it in for the government. I worked at the Civil Intelligence Agency for a few years and started Chapter 8 along with two of my companions, which I met at the military and civil intelligence agencies in early 2020. I have a master in criminology and I'm a cyber volunteer for the Dutch National Police. So now we've got that covered. I'm going to talk to you about what purple teaming is not. Purple teaming is not a penetration test. A penetration test is really kind of a classical approach to information security. If you want something audited or tested or stress tested, a security person say, yes, we need to pen test this. And you have several flavors of penetration testing, from a full red team exercise to an audit. And then usually what happens, well, you get a very nice report of 40 pages of PDF, which you then as an organization have to translate into long-term projects and recommendations. And sometimes it disappears at the bottom drawer of a chest. So this classical approach to information security, what is really missing in this kind of approach? Well, it's a bit one-sided. And what is missing, people, is cooperation. Purple teaming is also not an audit. This is where you specialize in extensive research from measuring the truth in relation to a mandatory norm. I do see that also the audit field is really moving towards an active, lean and agile, collaborative kind of auditing, which I truly I like that. And you need in your field consistent professional judgment to make the same recommendations and the professional recommendations about the situation in relation to that norm every time. So also what is often tough in this approach is the client auditor relationship. So again, in this approach, cooperation is something that is well not usual. So what then is a purple team? A purple team kind of is a pen test on steroids, and it coexists with penetration testing, red teaming, and audits and compliance. So it's not a substitute for either of them. But as far as a red team goes, which is a one-sided approach, a purple team does offensive security. The red team at the same time, in real time, with the blue team, the defensive side. So at Chapter 8, we are a small-scale purple team. We are 3 Dutchies in the roles of hacker, hunter, and healer. And hacker, of course, is the offensive part of purple. The hunter is the defensive part. Well, and I am the white part. I manage the team, and I have the job of translating the very technical results of the hacker and the hunter towards more strategic and comprehensible advice on sea level. And also, I'm at least 10 years older than our hacker and our hunter. So, I also have the job of data crunching stuff while they run off into further parts of the network. So purple teaming is all about the cooperation between these 3 roles in real time. And we bring this cooperation to the table in what we call missions or assignments, in which our hacker plays out a real-life attack scenario, while the hunter works together with the client to scope out hacker and try to see if you can spot hacker moving towards crown jewels. So as hacker, hunter, and healer cooperate, like, do you see me moving here? Do you see me touching this? Or this is really bad. In the purple team mission, you are in direct contact with the organization in real time. And that is when you help fixing security issues during the assignments. So it's close to auditing because the purple team really assesses design, existence, functionality of security measures, but we do it using real-time attack scenarios. So in that respect, I could tell you about the one time where a client thought their guest Wi-Fi was separated from their internal network. But today I'll stick to a few war stories from which the advantages of purple teaming over red teaming will become clear, and from which you hopefully take away some pointers on purple team core philosophies, client communication, some mission preparation, and some stuff about mythical animals. To start with the latter, let's talk about dragons. So in the early Middle Ages, many parts in the world were still unknown, and cartographers used mythical animals to fill in the blanks, so to speak. And the phrase hic sunt dracones stems from those early medieval times. It was written on one of the first known globes, the Hunt Lennox globe, which was made of 2 halves of ostrich egg. And the translation, here be dragons, is nowadays used as a reference for entering dangerous territory. And in our mission reports, we use it for the high risk findings, especially those that should be fixed yesteryear. So why this approach? Well, it adds a little humor to the often shocking findings from purple team assignments. And shocking findings, yes, because purple teaming is frighteningly effective if you combine it with 3 core principles. The identification of your crown jewels is first. The second principle is assume breach. And the third principle is train as they fight. So this first principle, what's really simple and obvious also to you as professional auditors, an organization has to know what it needs to protect the most. And this always is the first stage also of purple team assessments, asking the simple question with often hard answers, because every attacker, once inside your network, will go for those crown jewels. So as an organization, you'd better know damn well what these are, where they live, and how you think they should be protected. And also, this principle indicates the level of trust an organization must have in a purple team, because one does not simply give information about one's crown jewels. And this essential preparation stage gives both hacker and hunter clear directions on what to look for in both defense and offense. So healer now has the role to make the crown jewels tangible. For example, when we asked C-level in one of our missions, what would hurt the company the most? They started out with reputation, because that's what they always do. But what does reputation or intellectual property or sensitive information translate to? What makes bad press? So this is a company which provides physical security solutions. And it turned out that C-level's biggest fear was that those details of those solutions, blueprints, locations, access codes, would leak. So now we have made a reputation tangible. So after times, a tangible crown jewel become the business critical systems. And with those and access to sensitive information also comes the now widespread fear of being ransomware. And that fear is widely spread nowadays, given the pandemic. But to be honest, if an attacker has that kind of access in the network or in a company to actually ransom your crown jewels, he or she is already at the latest and final stage of his attack and probably in your network for quite some time. So as an attacker will always go for those crown jewels, you need to catch an attacker moving towards them. So from a blue perspective, a hunter's perspective, you should really fence in those crown jewels and work your way outside to the edges of the network to find ways to detect an attacker moving. So before we go to our second principle, assume breach, I would like to take a few steps back and take you back to the early days of ICT and ICT infrastructure. So ICT in the old days was comparable to this village. I hope this is a bit familiar. It's from a comic, Asterix and Obelix, about a small village resisting the Roman Empire years and years and years ago. So if you compare this to an old ICT infrastructure, this has oversight. It's simple and it's static. This picture has not changed for 20 years. So what you have here, if you compare servers and computers to the houses, you know where those houses are. There are not many houses. You know where the roads are. There's a fence around the village. You know where the stream is, and there's always that cow in the left side of the picture. It will be there for ages. So this is static, and that also counts for the population. Let's say the users of the network. These users of the network is a known population. You know who they are, you know what roles they have, and you know that the blacksmith and the fishmonger are always fighting. So it's again a pretty static picture. If you talk about crown jewels in this comic, well, there's really only one crown jewel, and I'd like to put up a poll right now and ask. Normally I ask which crown jewel it is, but in an online session that's kind of hard. But I think you all know where I'm aiming at. This is the magical potion made by Panoramix, the crown jewel protected in the comic. One kettle, one potion, guarded by one old man. So again, ICT infrastructure years ago was small, static, and had oversight. So if you compare it to now, that oversight has completely gone, and ICT infrastructure is more comparable to a city. I'll let you guess which city this is, because it is Eindhoven. And if you look at the city, it has been built organically. It has grown organically. There's lots of different wijken. Sorry, I don't know, can't remember the name right now. Lots of separate buildings, a lot of roads, a lot of access, and it's grown, and there's really no oversight. The same goes with the population, and even cities are interconnected now as well, right? So the population of the city, or the users of this kind of infrastructure, you have your teenagers, you have your students, you have people who, I don't know who they are, but they like blue. But you also have people who do not adhere that much to the social norms of the majority, right? And outright criminals, you have to take these into account as well. They will use your infrastructure as well. So there's no oversight in infrastructure, less oversight, far less oversight, and there's a really a different and a very large population using that infrastructure. And if you look at crown jewels from this perspective, well, this is the risk map, it's open source risk map of Eindhoven. You see the crown jewels in this city being spread out all over the infrastructure. The same goes for crown jewels within a modern ICT infrastructure. They're not located on one server, they're located all the way through the network, everywhere through the network, and they will each require different access, different security, different operational, technical and procedural countermeasures to secure those, right? So what is the consequence really of this organic growth and enormous explosion of ICT infrastructure is that most organizations have built what we call a watermelon. So it's an infrastructure with kind of a hard shell, but once you've penetrated that shell, you can just walk around in a soft marsh and encounter a seed now and then. But basically, lateral movement in these kinds of networks, once you've penetrated this, is pretty easy. So this brings us to our second Purple Team principle, which is assume breach. And this principle is getting traction, but pretty slowly. It means that you should work under the assumption that some attacker is always targeting you and your infrastructure, and that he will try and eventually succeed to breach your defense perimeter and gain foothold inside your network. Because our many years of working in incident response, and honestly the almost daily news on big breaches since the last year, clearly prove that no matter how high your fence is, someday, somehow an attacker will find its way in. And that is, people, when the real fight starts. So keep in mind that even inside your network, an attacker needs to have a few wins before eventually reaching those crown jewels. And this gives Blue, the defense part, multiple opportunities to detect and mitigate. Well, this is Plankton from the SpongeBob cartoon series, and Plankton is an advanced persistent threat in that world, because every episode, again and again, he will try to go for the recipe, the secret recipe of the crab burger, and in one episode, he actually succeeds in grabbing it. So you see this in sports too. If you look at Lionel Messi, Paris Saint-Germain, brilliant red teamer, brilliant striker. He has multiple shots on goal each match, and this puts a burden on the opposing team's blue team, the backs and the keeper, who they have to get their defense right, not to lose the match. But how do you think those soccer players become the best attackers and best defenders in the world? Well, of course, by training together and trying to match the TTPs of the best players in the world, right? Which brings us to our third Purple Team philosophy: train as they fight. So this principle really boils down to not bringing a butter knife to a gunfight. Our digital adversaries are street fighters. They will not respect a clean fight. They will not stick to the rules of the game. The only thing they want to do is take you down and hurt you and go for those crown jewels. So in a street fight, there are no referees. They won't be handing out cards. They won't be making sure everyone plays by the rules. And if you had to train to get in the ring with a street fighter, would you stick to a punching bag? No, of course not, because then you will certainly get your butt kicked badly. So to prepare for a fight like that, you must learn street fighting TTPs, so that you can learn to defend yourself. So that means getting in the ring, sparring under controlled circumstances. And I do recommend you take a look at this YouTube series and plot what you see there on how we normally think about cybersecurity assessments. And really, these sparring sessions, offensive and defensive training at the same time, is what purple teaming is all about. So train as they fight in a purple team setting means playing out real life attack scenarios and trying to defend against those attack scenarios in real time. So will you get hurt? definitely. But after each round of sparring, you will have become a better fighter. You will have better understanding of both defense and attack and how they work together and how these map on your infrastructure. And the funny thing is that in sports and in military, sparring is kind of obvious, but in cybersecurity, it's not yet. So these three philosophies, the crown jewels, assume breach, and train as they fight, they make for a pretty hefty battleground. So let's dive right into the juicy stories. I see I'm well ahead of time, so less time to beer. In the first war story, I'll tell you how purple teaming played out in an organization with a below average security posture. So in this war story, hacker started out with a hardware implant within the office. So there was no network access control, and the implant provided a back connect, and thus gave hacker remote access to the network. Of course, the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, knew this, but the rest of IT staff and security did not. And as the mission played out, hacker gained domain administrator in one day using service accounts and bad basic hygiene. So this story just shows the tip of the iceberg. There was much more, but we have a fourth principle which we adhere to. That is, why stop there? And over the course of a few more days, we gained a lot more than only domain administrator accounts. We created multiple layers of persistence across the network, access to all the crown jewels. So basically, in a day and a half, we completely owned the whole network. So this is really a red team exercise. We'll make it purple in a minute. So several factors made this happy path possible. First, administrator add was used as a service account for MS SQL, which made it easy to dump the credentials using Kerberos red team techniques. And again, administrator add also was the domain administrator account, which is kind of not a best practice. Second, they did have a strong password policy to which all regular users adhered. Not in the least because CISO had put much effort into security awareness programs, and the policy, unfortunately, was not digitally enforced. And the awareness did not stick with IT staff. So the password of the service account was cracked within minutes using a default password list and some hashcat magic, because humans do very predictable things to passwords. And third, as I already told you, administrator add was indeed the name for the domain administrator account. So this was the red team side of this war story. It's time for another lesson on dragons, and let's see if we can make this purple. Right, so on that sunny first afternoon of the first mission day, we sat down with CISO and the IT staff, and we said, oh, we basically owned your network undetected, working from the assume breach principle. And this brings us to our second fun fact on mythical animals. Dragons, especially those in a wine form, go very well with watermelon. So what then does a watermelon have to do with red teaming? Well, assume breach was considered cheating by IT staff, because what they did was actually build a watermelon. They built a really hard shell, and you could not get in physically very easy. But once inside, well, you can just plug in your device and be happy and go about with it. The thing is, with the kind of posture and exposure this organization had, it is really not. You can assume that advanced threat actors will take the time to levitate this insider threat to an actual attack scenario. So, lack of best practice, basic hygiene and monitoring on the internal network made hackers' life way too easy, while Hunter basically started the fight upside down with two hands tied behind his back. And unfortunately, this watermelon model is not unique. We see it in many organizations. So how then did we make this purple? Well, because this customer did not have a security operations center or basically any form of logging, we built an open source security operations center, just started logging crown jewel stuff right then and right then during the assessment. And this immediately showed some other anomalies within the network, and it raised much awareness amongst CISO and IT staff. So the red team beating they took, along with the blue team effort to create some insight and helping IT staff out, gave CISO the use case he needed for more security budget when we reported our mission walkthrough to C-level. So after the mission, they decided to immediately change the cracked administrator password, which they had put safely in the safe, or so they thought. It was not in safe, and the IT staff had to ask us for the administrator password so they could change their own administrator password into a stronger administrator password. So the awkward was very strong that day, and much wine and watermelon were needed to soften the mood there. So for our second war story, we'll switch to a completely different environment. The organization that we'll talk about right now has multiple security vendors to work with. Think network-based security, host-based monitoring, external attack surface monitoring, everything, and a dedicated internal security staff of several people. So a very mature organization cybersecurity-wise. So, working from our principles, with a happy and motivated hunter this time, we started out this mission with a tied-down guest account on the internal network. Again, this was a very successful mission from a red team perspective, but this time we chose living off the land techniques because of the abundance of hunters eyeballing their logs in search of hacker. So this is also a part of purple teaming and a part of sparring in sports as well. Attackers adjust their level to the level of defense, so that the learning opportunity is and the return on investment for the blue team is maximized. So we cannot exactly tell you the happy path here because of non-disclosure agreement, but think things like open shares and Visual Basic script as a starting point. And hacker was spotted multiple times even, but mostly on the tools level. So if you look at the pyramid of pain pictured here, the security vendors were doing a really good job on the tools level, which is already challenging enough, but became blind while nearing the TTPs. And there is absolutely no shame in this, because considering the sheer size of this network and the natural growth of ICT infrastructure and the experimental setup of working in a team of vendors together, they did a pretty good damn job of hunting hacker down. So the real-time communication between red and blue, consisting of hunter and the vendors, led to use case customization in real time, which is a requirement for detecting an advanced attacker who is living off the land. So I communicated directly with CISO at C-level, and that made this mission about this as purple as it gets. So about the team of security experts then, I'd like to elaborate a bit on this point, because this is in my many years of working in cybersecurity, the first organization I've had the pleasure to work for that forces security vendors to work together in one team. So imagine this team made up of a network security vendor, a SIEM security vendor, a team lead, CISO, security architects, all eyeballing the red team efforts in real time. So imagine the tension in the air, people being on their toes, spotting unusual network traffic, which fired a newly developed use case combining network and host data from a certain point inside the network. There is much rejoicing and eyeballing hacker. So why is he there? What will be his next plans? Will we kick him offline or follow him to know his next move? So this setup in a team of vendors in a more mature environment makes for a perfect purple team playing ground with people working against this idea of a common enemy, who is, of course, secretly part of the team as well. Because what I told you earlier, communication is key, right? So if hacker moves off into the network and he is not spotted by the blue team, he will make some noise or generate some extra logging to say, okay, guys, I'm here right now. You didn't spot me, but when I make noise, you probably do see me. So now adjust your detection so that you see me moving through the network and towards those crown jewels. So this was training as they fight for real. The setup works, but only if the vendors, including us, leave company ego at the door and are prepared to learn from each other. So key is that, okay, this slide is not really good. Well, no worries. Key is that this kind of purple team setup quickly turns into king of the hill. It gets people on board and focused, even across competitor enemies, because there is that concept of a common enemy. So we found and fixed a lot of security layer weaknesses in real time, and a big win for the organization because, as you probably know, turnaround time from classical red team exercises or audits to actual improvements usually takes much longer, even months. So some findings, of course, will take much longer to fix because they are inherently connected to human behavior or having to manage a scarily large Active Directory forest and, well, network hygiene, which is always a tough cookie to crack. And those require cooperation from other divisions within the organization. And they're also having a team of experts helps, but more on that later. For the blue team, the mission meant use cases for both vendors were fine-tuned or created from scratch based on hackers' movements. And what we also learned is that red and blue office hours do not map on CISO working hours. So the poor guy got called out of bed a few times during the mission because hackers work at night, our hacker as well. And he got called out of bed, which is from incident response perspective a really good thing, right? So you test those procedures as well. Only to determine that it was us. Well, sorry, not sorry. Because of the size of the network and the amount of hours we put in, we decided to map most of the red team actions in Vector. And this is where it gets really hands-on for you guys as well. So Vector is an open source toolset, courtesy of Security Risk, which allows tracking of really all things purple. You can find it on vector.io, and we found that it's a great help to visualize mission results, especially for less technical people who rely on eye candy. So kudos for Security Risk there. Vector is after the fact. So after a mission, you document all the attack paths and all the documentation, and you document from a blue perspective which attack vectors were detected and which were not. So that requires a red teamer that really extensively documents as well. The thing is that you can, using Vector, you can measure progress over time. So you can build use cases, replay attacks, and then map out if you've made improvements or not. So although mapping in Vector still has its quirks, for one thing, Vector is really tied to the kill chain sequence, but a hacker's happy path will hop all over the kill chain back and forth. So that makes visualization of the full happy path in time kind of a pain in the ass, but well, okay. And also Vector's actual access control model is not that granular yet. So ideally you want an organization to host its own Vector instance if it decides to use Vector. Well, but not in the cloud, not virtualized. Just do that on Iron, on a separate segment of the network, of course. And also build a Mattermost container next to it for communication between the team. And we'll certainly use Vector in the future and Mattermost to design a map upcoming for purple team campaigns. And also, another benefit of Vector is that it is built around MITRE. MITRE, you know MITRE ATT&CK, of course. MITRE had shield, which is now MITRE Engage. And MITRE Engage maps the mitigations for the attack techniques, and it's quickly becoming the de facto industry framework. We use several other frameworks for the mapping of defensive measures as well, but none of them seem really to be complete, which is not that kind of surprising. And in the line of keeping it simple, we decided to use one framework to rule them all. And again, because purple teaming is not equal to an official audit, where you have to map against the legal norm, this one framework, MITRE, does the job for us. So up until now, you've heard some mission-specific adventures and takeaways. And we could talk about these for days because it's so much fun to do. But we'll wrap things up with some more generic stuff, things we see across every mission. Come on, there you wrap up. So first, we think that because of the watermelon model, purple team assessments really work best on the inside of a network, adhering to the principle of assume breach. Because who needs a red team on the outside if you have the internet, right? So because basic hygiene is still a massive problem, organizations should focus their purple team efforts on the inside and right around those crown jewels where the return on investment is largest and where a digital street fight escalates the quickest. You can compare this to the Swiss, how they built their country and protect themselves. If the Swiss would eventually end up in a war, they would retract in the mountains and blow up some bridges, and they could last for years there. You would never be able to reach them. But the lowlands, so the outskirts of Switzerland, so to speak, they just give that up. So again, they work from their crown jewels to the outside of the country, and that is how we think you should build your defenses as well. Second, we find that almost every hacker happy path boils down to building a defensible network architecture. This is a principle coined by Richard Belchich over 15 years ago. It stood the test of time, but it's not used widely yet due to the organic growth of ICT infrastructure. So a defensible network architecture is one that's monitored, controlled, minimized, and governed. So it's all about robust network hygiene and getting the basics right. You give it any name you want, but you can build it along to these principles. For the Dutch people in this session, the Civil Intelligence and Security Agency has just put out a framework which they call verdedigbare netwerkarchitectuur. And it's a good read. It's based on risk management and principles like assume breach to really help you guide or help an organization guide the thought process of building a defensible network architecture. So that really is a read worthwhile. So third, what we see is that almost no organization does a CMDB, an inventory of assets, right? Maintaining a proper inventory seems pretty hard to do. And there's this saying in information security, you cannot protect what you do not know you have, right? So there you go, still a problem. And fourth, do not underestimate the resistance to purple team results. We have seen all Kubler-Ross stages every time we present the findings to others than CISOs, who more often than not see confirmation of their underbelly feelings. So we've seen, well, it starts with shock, of course, and then denial. So there's no way you could have done this. You could have done this and reached crown jewels this way. Outright anger. Well, this is cheating. Think about leaving devices behind. We have seen bargaining. So yeah, this is not my problem. It's not in the policy. So if it's not in the policy, it's not my fault. Stuff like that. We've seen depression, sentences like I'll probably lose my job over this and we are all doomed. To finally, the end stage is acceptance. Well, right, this was a mimicked street fight. We're glad it's not an actual adversary. We've got our butt kicked and it's bad, but we've learned and now at least we know and now we can really make stuff better. So that is why you, as a purple team, you want to really get into that last phase, acceptance. And that is why acting as a team and cooperating with the target organization on all levels, and blue, white, and red social skills are key to moving forward. The first thing we usually do, and I think you can relate to that as auditors, is say, okay, we are not the enemy here, right? We're here to help the organization out. So work with us, cooperate, and learn from this experience, and that's when you'll be happiest. So fifth, So far, red always wins. This is reality. It's just check the daily news. Blue just needs to do better. However, because of the real-time feedback to blue at sea level, security awareness usually shoots to the moon and is immediately transformed into actions that help raise defenses. That is also why purple is better than red. Red team assessments can feel like getting your ass kicked without having the chance to fight back. And in purple teaming, an organization does have that chance to fight back because it's more like a sparring session. Moreover, purple lets blue train as red fights, and depending on blue's skill, red can adopt his attack range from run-of-the-mill Kali tools to just living off the land techniques and acting as an advanced persistent threat, thus enabling blue to truly train and get better instead of feeling stabbed in the back and getting kicked in the nuts. And last, red usually wins, but in every assessment we've seen that blue has its moments of shininess as well. And it's really important to identify, recognize, and celebrate those moments and build on the successes of blue. Because in a real life situation, these small moments are what can change the course of a real incident. And in true purple team settings, red will share these moments of joy if he gets caught, because it means that the organization has learned to defend itself a bit better. So that's, in our opinion, the true value of purple and why we are actually really in love with it. So thank you for bearing with me during this large half hour. Hopefully you've gotten a hang of how valuable purple teaming can be for both mature and less mature organizations if you base it on 3 core principles and dragons and wine, of course. So if you have any questions, drop me a mail or a LinkedIn message and we'll take it from there.
We do have one question, Pippin. Basically, do you advise to use monitored honeypots in the network? And did you hit honeypots during assessments? That's one question that we have.
Cool. To start with the last question, we have had one assessment where we knew, because it's purple teaming, we knew beforehand that there were honeypots in the network, but we didn't know where they were. And we completely owned the network and the honeypots didn't trigger. So that's you can use monitored honeypots, but you should really think very carefully about how and where you implement them. We do think a lot about deception, and deception can be a lot more than just a honeypot. Deception can also mean an account in Active Directory which isn't used or propagated, and you know if that account gets used or that service account gets used, then you know that someone is doing something. So a honeypot is really like a run-of-the-mill type of deception, like a starting point. But if you think about deception along the path that a hacker will take through the network, you can build deception in much more intelligent ways, which won't even trip hacker. It's more like tripwires than honeypots.
Yep. We have another question. Do you think that purple teaming exercise can or will replace traditional compliance audit in giving a better assurance for internal management and external parties like regulators and customers? That's to say, auditing processes and documentation. That's one of the questions we have.
Okay, I don't think that will. It's not a replacement, absolutely not, because purple teaming is more like a sparring session, and an audit is far more formal and compliant. They coexist. Next to each other.
Yep, we do have multiple questions, so please bear with me. Sorry, I'm reading all of them quickly. Do you expect the use of AI in self-defending networks? That's the question, as hackers will use AI to circumvent technical security controls. I think that's more of a generic forecast for the future.
AI in cybersecurity. Well, yes, definitely, but on the blue side, on the hunter side, AI I think is unmissable. But it's also kind of a hype term, because it's good AI is always custom for one network and one situation, because you have to learn what is normal and then try to be smart about that. So it's really a really hard process to do right, just like Zero Trust.
Yeah, we do have another couple of questions. Should a company have a certain security aspects in place before you can do or start a purple teaming? For example, would you rather recommend a red teaming in certain circumstances before the purple? Basically, that's at least my understanding for the question.
I think it really depends on the situation. Okay, purple teaming is not right for example, application penetration testing. So that really is a red team exercise, just trying to take an application apart. So red teaming still has its form and value, but if you want to let an organization learn in a short time, then I think you should always try to do purple teaming instead of red teaming, because that implies that you work with the organization. And even within immature organization, there's always some people who are responsible for IT security. And maybe they have log files, maybe they don't look at them, but you can help these people out as well. So I think purple teaming as attack scenarios and attack simulations work for every organization, be it mature or immature.
Okay, there is another follow-up question on that one. When you spoke, I think when you speak of IT assets, you say that some companies don't know all the IT assets they have. And I guess that's very common, not to have a proper inventory. Have you also seen that there are difference between what companies see and mark as crown jewels and what hackers would see as crown jewels?
Yeah, because hackers are, depending on the actor, on their motivation, are out for different things. If you look at state actors, they're really about persistence in the network, and persistence in interesting environments is already a crown jewel in itself, and access to information. But in the end, the business motives always align with the hacker motives, because if you look at criminal intent, hackers are out to hurt a company, and in any value they can squeeze out of a company is a crown jewel. So what you now see is mostly double or triple extortion schemes, where they gain access or buy access into an infrastructure, gain persistence, exfiltrate all the information they think is valuable to an organization, and then lock the network. So as a company, you then have to pay ransom to be able to work again, and after that you have to pay another ransom not to have your data published. So that's only the in the end, I think if you talk about risk management, an organization really needs to have a very, very deep understanding of what is valuable for the company. Hackers will find it out in no time.
Yep, we have one more question. What is, in your opinion, the added value of traditional IT controls for cybersecurity, and what improvements would you suggest to improve these controls? I think that's a bit of a generic one, but
can you repeat that? I'm reading the chat.
Yeah, what is in your opinion the added value of traditional IT controls for cybersecurity? So that's question A. And what improvements would you suggest to improve these controls?
Wow, that is a very generic question.
Yeah.
Of course, traditional controls, it all boils down to people, process, and technology. You cannot do cybersecurity only in cyber. You have to have physical security as well, and procedural security as well. So those traditional controls do absolutely have their value. But what you do in a purple team is really assess if they are in place and how they work and how the organization responds to a real incident. So based on the outcomes of something like a purple team assessment, you can then go back to your traditional controls and map out and see where the improvements are. So it all has its place. It's just a different side of the portfolio.
I have a question from my side that's a little bit related to the experience. So the bigger the company, the more complex the security team. That's usually kind
Mhm.
of a rule of thumb, but also the more complex the IT architecture. And there are always what I like to call the dark corners where just few teams are aware of. And in a traditional security literature, we talk about like the red team as pen testers and the blue team as defenders who are all working in security. What's your opinion about like the IT administration? So those guys who are actually responsible for the systems, and traditionally or non-traditionally, I don't mind. How do you think the relationship should be during a purple exercise, the purple team exercise?
It's a very good thing you mentioned this because most of the purple team results boil down to improvements that have to be made on the IT administrator side. So
Yeah.
if you purple teaming is about cooperation with a lot of people in the organization, and I do really recommend that you bring the IT guys on board as fast as possible. Because anyway, around the outcomes of a mission will have effect on those guys as well. So if you bring them on board earlier and just help them take along, help them drag along and walk along the mission, they will have a much better understanding. Again, as opposed to just feeling kicked in the nuts or backstabbed later. It's really the emotions of those people. You have to. Well, they're important assets to your organization. So work with them.
Yep, and I wanted to elaborate more on that. That's why I wanted to know your opinion first, and then go a little bit step further. So having an external purple team is kind of like joint military training, right? You get military from the outside of your country and your own military to get trained. But that doesn't substitute having the same exercises done fully internal. Or do you think it should always be mixed, internal and external?
They both have their values. If you bring in experts from the outside, you have an objective view and a really a clean view of the network, because an external a red teamer will just enter the network and start looking around. They based on no knowledge at all beforehand. But of ideally, in my opinion, every organization should have an internal security organization which exists of a bit of offensive and a bit of defensive and IT administration. So in a perfect world for me, most organizations will grow to a maturity level that they will have this cooperative purple team mindset inside their own company, and just play out attack scenarios every time again. Because let's be honest, in the physical world, there are also people watching if the cameras are regularly checking if the cameras are still in the right places and stuff, and they report if somewhere a gate is broken. So if you translate that mindset to IT, that will be perfect. Then again, bringing in people from the outside will really shake up the visions you have about the state of things.
So if we say like this is the first time someone goes into the journey of a purple team exercise, maybe it's best to be after an audit and a closure of audit findings, so they are at a state which is kind of deemed good state, and then they start from there. Is that a good approach?
Well, it's either way. As I say, it's not audits and purple teaming or red team exercises really coexist. So if an organization wants to start with an audit and then try to measure the real situation against the results of these audits, they're more than welcome. On the other hand, purple team missions can lead to renewed audits as well. So they're mutually enhancing factors.
Okay, that's good to hear. First of all, allow me to thank you so much for today's presentation. I really enjoyed it. I don't see any more further questions coming in the chat, so maybe I'll give the guys a small 30 seconds minute. Can you guys ping us any questions or raise your hand and unmute yourself and say the question?
Thanks for the applause.
Yep, there is a lot of applause. And yeah, I would like to thank you so much. Also, I'll take the screen sharing if you don't mind, Pipin, to arrange just we're going to have the 3rd of November, the next Square Table, which is called Dark Path Scammers, newest fraudulent scheme targeting 100+ companies worldwide. The speaker is Dimitri Tunkin. I would like to thank our speaker tonight. I would like to thank all of you and hope to see you soon. Thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thanks for having me.